Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. Boom. All right, welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And this is one of our sense-making series, and it's called The Dark Stoa, starring Pat Ryan. And rumor has it he's one of the most, if not the most, dangerous man on the internet. And if you were following the Dark Stoa series, season 1 wrapped up last week, and it was a wild ride. We heard talks on CRISPR as art, belief as technology, robotic nationalism, autocults, and Gnostic warfare. And for season 2, it's on Devouring Humanism. And then Pat sent this message on Facebook to me. It's where I teach you how to analyze everything Blue Church does for the sole purpose of destroying every single foothold it has. Ooh, sounds pretty juicy. So that being said, same drill as last time. Pat's going to share his thoughts, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. This will be recorded and put on YouTube. So if you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate for me to read your question on your behalf. That being said, I'll hand it over to you, Pat.
Excellent. Thank you again for the introduction. And thank you all for returning for season 2 of whatever my mind has come up with. I appreciate the audience and the willingness to keep sticking this out. It's partial therapy, and it's also confirmation that I think I'm not the only one who sees some of the things I'm talking about. So usually I give you a primer about what the episode's going to be about, but I decided to bake it into the episode. So let's just get started. Ooh, I need you to enable screen sharing, sir. Ooh, nice stogie.
Can you do it now?
Let me find it. Yes, I can. Thank you much. Excellent. Alrighty. Welcome to Gaussian identity. I've been accused of using big words to make myself sound intelligent, which I always respond, that's preposterous. So let's explain what this means. Last season, we were exploring this meme without even knowing it, which is rather interesting. We broke down the whole season into various episodes covering various collections of these ideas. So all of season 1 was here, basically. Everything that was being covered there, which was Gnostic warfare. We didn't get too much into this side, however. So this season is going to be examining why this side even exists, if you detect these things happening, and what you can do about it, which I'll be calling it Devouring Humanism. That's a play on words. It's whether humanism is devouring us, or perhaps we should devour it, depending upon how you interpret it. And as we go over this, we'll explain why it's not a bad idea to do so. So for episode 1, we'll be focusing on Gaussian identity, which covers these points in the pink box thusly. Okay. So what is identity? Isn't that the great question? Everyone has a billion opinions on it, and for every person, they have 10 definitions of identity. And as always, I challenge your definitions and hopefully guide it in a more lucrative fashion. So let's start with how philosophy and math reviews identity. It states very simply that if anything that's indiscernible, that's basically what the identity is. So if x equals 6 and y equals 7, then x equals y, and thus that's the identity, x equals y. It's worth noting that perhaps these two statements are what's making them different, despite the value that they are, but that again leads into the realm of philosophy. So what does psychology and neurology have to say? They say that the brain is a meat-based autocorrelator of temporal events, meaning if this is your timeline, this is your time, your x is your time, and this is, I forget what S stands for, but the point is, like, you have events that are going to happen, they funnel into your brain, and then they become past events. So the ability to correlate these events is how you stitch your identity in psychology and neurology. Now, whether that's completely true or not, again, what is the relationship between philosophy and math and psychology and neurology? Well, it's not readily obvious. How do I get x equals 6 and then some little dot being correlated to some other dot that might happen. It's not an easy it's not an easy way to comport the two domains. So we automatically see right up front that identity is really domain specific. And then we get the sociology where it says you don't even exist. You're just an intersection of groups, group dynamics. So, I'm here. If this is group A of circus clowns and giraffe hunters and I don't know, people I don't like on the internet, then I'm here, right? So I don't even exist. I'm just an intersection. That's according to sociology. Finance sees you as a vehicle for future activity. And also a modifiable vehicle for future activity. You volunteer to promise future activity, and if you don't deliver it, they have ways to make you involuntarily deliver it. So that's how finance views identity. You're just you're an occupant on a future bond, basically on a future promise to deliver. Productivity is, you may have heard the phrase, let's pivot and go in a different direction. In this case, you're a distribution of adjustable priority focuses. Maybe I'm focused on checking my emails. Maybe I'm focused on writing code. Maybe I'm focused on walking my dog. And I shift between these distributions as time allows it. So as myself as project manager, I have maximum flexibility with these individual identities. So I can actually shift your focus. And by doing so, I change your identity. Then there's alchemy. Alchemy is a little known thing. There's a billion opinions on it. But long story short, the idea is that identity is never known. It is a black box. It is a permanent black box. You feed it context and you get action. And this is an old way of interpreting identity, which is no longer considered anymore. But we're going to find a way to bring this guy right on back. And let's keep going. What does physics say? Physics just threw up its hands around 1930 with the Pauli exclusion principle, where it couldn't figure out anything, really. It couldn't tell you one photon from another. It couldn't figure out fermions from anything. It was all a mess. So you couldn't even rely on physics to figure out, well, this atom is occupying this unique spot in time, and then this atom's occupied. Well, it turns out they sometimes overlap and occupy the same space because of their distribution of probability of existence. So it gets real messy. You can't even rely on physics for identity. Then you get to biology, where every time your cells go through mitosis, they keep asserting the same DNA over every generation, over and over and over again. Perhaps that's an identity. And then there's error correcting in the DNA duplication process to keep that continuity going. So there's a strong biological definition of identity right there. And then there's geopolitics, where you are born, you are bound to the rivalrous power dynamics of whatever group you're born into, because on this spheroid we call Earth, not all topologies are equal. They're not all equally valuable. They don't have equal resources on them. And no matter how we configure ourselves according to all the previous mentioned domains, we might not get equality of outcome either. So all of these things are heuristics of identity. So the idea of saying that this is identity and it's a race thing, or it's a gender thing, or man, it's all over the place. There's a whole grab bag of concepts you can use to define identity. And as we assemble those heuristics together, that's what politics is. Let me walk you through that firecracker of a statement, right? So let's look at race-based scientific nationalism, which we all know is a certain continental country in 1940 tried this out, where they decided to put the heuristic of genetics and geodestiny, geopolitics, at the first priority of their political system. Meaning, when it came to the resources that a political system could channel or control or modify, when it came to flowing it through its political web, these 2 points got first dibs. So these guys got first access to it. And as you get further down the chain, you get least and least access. So all these guys get all the nice stuff, and then, crumbs everyone else. And that's prioritization of identity heuristics in politics. And as you change these around, you get totally different political systems. So in the case of race-based scientific nationalism, I'm putting genetics and geodestiny at the front. Psychology comes next. I'm going to look at physics as something to invest in regarding identity, then math, and eventually finance. And usually finance is like this fulcrum, this bow tie, where everything on this side is the driver and everything on this side is management. Then you get groups, and the individual is just like way the hell down on you don't get any resources, buddy. Sorry, science is way more important than you are. That's just life. And then you turn around and psychometric liberal capitalism, where we put psychology at the top, the research of psychology and the analysis of human behavior. Mathematics is going to drive that. So these two factors alone, you get psychometric economics, which then you bind to the horse of financial management, and then you get everything else. And in this case, you know, physics is just not even remotely important in any type of liberal capitalism. And then you get to race and geopolitics. Of course, those are going to be at the end. The idea of liberal capitalism is to maximize the psychology of each individual. So these things should be smoothed out and don't matter because we can always modify the brain. And then you have communal blank slate capitalism, which people tend to call communism, which is adorable. But it's state capitalism with the assumptions of communal blank slates. So the idea of sociology being the core driver of financial management, meaning how do I configure these intersections of groups to then bind their productivity to what I need, or bind their promises of the future to my ability to manage everyone else. Psychology comes downstream of this, which is an odd priority. Individuals come a little bit higher than most other systems. It's actually interesting that alchemy tends to overweigh geopolitics. After all, these guys want to, you know, dissolve borders and that type of business. But these are just examples. I might be giving them the wrong names, and you're free to go full autism and stickler on that. But I'm just demonstrating a politics do priorities on identity heuristics, not individual identities. That's what we in democracy in America tend to get confused about. We tend to think that certain identities get priority, but in reality, it's the heuristic of identities that gets priority. How do we determine what identities exist? That's what's given primacy. And by the way, all of these permutations, well, look at that. They just happen to be the blue church political distribution trend. So when we say blue church, we're talking about these configurations of priority and how they're all related. They're not radically different from one another. They're not, one's a can of soup and one's a fish. They're all cousins of one another, driven by the same pressures, driven by the same conclusions. And that's what makes it a distribution trend. And that is what a blue church is a distribution of what identity heuristics take priority. So let's look at the mutation, because I brought it up. So what does the mutation of a political system look like? Well, it goes something like this. You turn around to the two priorities and you say, they made us feel sad. Maybe you didn't like gene-based primacy of your population mechanics, and maybe you thought geopolitics was a pretty stupid idea to peg all your finance on. And you turned around and you picked two other candidates, and you said, you know, if we merge psychology with this financial management business, maybe that'll help us solve the problems that we're facing here. So you're shuffling your heuristics around. You're trying to figure out which one you really care about. Of course, there's superstitious crap over here that always, you know, you just push that down because that doesn't matter. That's all just like weirdos and voodoo thing, you know, whatever. We're not even care. We're not interested in that. We're trying to solve our problem here, right? So what do? Well, we just found a way to create psychometric liberal capitalism from race-based scientific nationalism. And all we had to do was change our identity heuristics. We had to put psychology and finance at the top with math as an arbitrator. And then we put these two concepts way the hell down. We got rid of them. We didn't like the idea of genetic destiny. We didn't like the idea of geodestiny. We wanted the ability to say everyone has a brain, and no matter what these other properties are, we can just tinker the brain endlessly and infinitely to get what we want and get this maximum of efficacy of the human condition in every person in our population, so we can maximize all the humans in our system. So, okay, we won, woohoo, we got our science, and the science that gets us all the goodies. We did it, the great struggle's over. Look at us, and these sciences are evil forever. We'll never touch them again. We'll ban them, and anybody who touches them will just drive down to Alex Jones level. And away you go. Did we have a revolution, or did we just have a mutation? Everybody wants a revolution. That's the sexy thing, right? Especially nowadays. Everybody wants to be the rebel on the internet, rah, rah, but it's no different than DNA mutation. It's just adjusting your base pairs. In this case, your base pair is going to be your identity heuristic. Oh, and by the way, here's a visualization showing that resource distribution in terms of priority. As you can see, you get here and nobody gets any crumbs. Now, why is it a blue church? Is it a blue church because of the individual configurations? No, that's not it. Is it a blue church because of priorities that are at the top? That's not it either. The reason why those things in the previous slide are the blue church is because of what they put last. These guys hate, absolutely loathe anything that is theocracy, that is religious, that is alchemical, that is mystical. These concepts of human psychology are not allowed to exist unchecked in a blue church scenario because they're dangerous, especially when you're coming up with these meticulous systems of psychological finance or these meticulous systems of race-driven nationalism. If you screw with the configuration of any one of those tiny axioms that power these systems, and this can do that, well, now you have a problem. So these guys are the biggest threat because they can actually screw up your entire distribution flow in your political system. So that's why they're driven to the red-headed stepchild. Okay. So how do you do this? We're looking at the gradient. We're not actually interested in we're not looking at the permutation of identity heuristics. Now we're just looking at the overall gradient. So let's just step back and look at the gradient of resource distribution, independent of whatever political system may exist. It goes from left to right. All the crumbs go here is your military industrial complex, and here's funding your school, right? So keep that in mind. So now let's look at why the blue church political gradient persists with the reinforcement factors it has from that funny little meme that was at the beginning of the presentation. We have runaway self-domestication as the top, the idea that a human reverts from the Chad to the Virgin meme, which is always funny. In this case, once a person becomes caught in the runaway self-domestication phase, they have a high chance of staying here on their own. They don't wander off and try to experiment with other type of identity heuristics. Once they're here, they're here. And it's pretty hard to break it. You actually have to do systemic level attacks to break this. It's not easy. We have exhibitionist Stockholm syndrome. Oh, look, a person with a tattoo of some Eye of Providence on themselves. They're not only cattle, but they're self-branding cattle too, right? So they're Stockholm. They're under the control of whatever master that they may or may not even recognize, and they take pride in the fact that they're under that control. And these little green arrows, what they're doing is they're decided, if you think of the population that's scattered between this gradient, these arrows are made to drive direction. So if you're in a population here, it's going to drive you this way. If you're in an exhibitionist Stockholm syndrome, it's going to drive you more towards green. If you're part of homogenization, it's going to drive you this way, right? So homogenization is an easy one. It's where everybody looks the same. And if you've ever been in any corporation that makes over $5 billion a year, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. Self-victimization, we all know and love this one. The idea that I'm the martyr. Now I'm at different stages of my martyrdom. I'm not out there running around, blowing myself up, but I'm on the track. I just need to be activated. That's what self-victimization, that's the purpose of it when you look at it from a control scheme. It's to get that person primed and ready for martyrdom on demand. And you built an entire culture of that. And all this is designed to keep blue church people, or designed to keep the population in the blue church funnel driving this way towards the high resource distribution that they're able to provide, because that's the way they set up their system. They're not necessarily evil per se, or they're doing this on purpose. It's just a byproduct of how they configure their identity heuristics, really. Universalism is the idea that every single human being, there is no borders between our personal beings. We're all the same and this kind of stuff. And, it's just designed to drive people more towards this. And as we get closer to the red space, we're finding people that are more expensive for the blue church to convert. So here's low-hanging fruit fishing with dynamite. Blue church can convert these people all day, every day, no problem. You get here and it gets more expensive for blue church to start tinkering with the identity heuristics because they're not throwing resources at it. So they don't have the means to command it or control it. You get the antinatalism. I can go on and on about the endless abortion debates that exist, but you get the point. Psychologically, this is designed to create a kind of 0-day mentality where there is no future and there is no past. There's only a bunch of 20-year-olds running around. It's a ridiculous psychological hack that's designed to create this beautiful looking moderate heaven that everybody swears exists. There's a lot of psychological onion peeling that happens here when you look at population distribution. Conscientiousness, we're already here, so now we're at the people who are too expensive to convert, and we're at the people who are getting more, who are cheaper to convert. Conscientiousness is this kind of like conflict resolution between the two, where if a population is here, I'm going to put out messages of like, you know, between your heart and your brain, you have to be rational, and you have to kind of understand the scenario and hear each other out. And that's entirely a cost strategy. That's not for the good of mankind. That's a cost heuristic. That's a cost assessment of the identity heuristic. Then you have the fighter class and the NPCs. These are the people who basically, they're like the guard labor of the official order of the regime. These guys basically protect everyone from here from doing anything to these people. And it's funny to think of these guys as a fighter class, but we do call them social justice warriors, right? So in D&D, they're technically a fighter class, and they're ready to rage out at a moment's notice. They want to guard the order that they love. This is the order that has given them universalism and conscientiousness and exhibitionism and all the things that they love and have made their entire identities about because of the arrangement of the heuristics. It's not actually something wrong with them. It has nothing to do with them or their psychology. It's just the order of the identity heuristics that has caused this outcome. Then peacock tails, the idea of like strutting around and look at my identity and my individualism, my hyper individualism. These people are too expensive to reach because they get more and more what is considered unstable in their thinking as opposed to people here. So you try to appeal to their individualism. You try to tug them out of this part by saying, "Oh, you're a cool individual person. Let's get you on the train and see if we can push you this way." It's a hack. It's a trick it's a cost strategy for this area. Contributing through defeat, sour grapes. The idea that you tried to reach for the grapes, but you didn't get them, and you say, "Oh, I didn't want them anyway." That's another concept of, well, you're going to fail here because we've structured the entire organization for you to fail. But as you fail, here's a nice little thing you can tell yourself so it doesn't feel like failure. So we can push you along the chain. From here on, pushing everyone up. That's the goal. But when it gets too expensive, we have to push people down. There's no way to push them through and make them this productive citizen, right, within our regime, within our identity heuristic collection. At some point, there is a line, and it's going to change per system. There is a line in which is too expensive to deal with these people. And so you need to trap them in a self-defeating mechanism because you just don't have the resources. Remember, the further down we go, the less resources you have. So you just don't have the resources to micromanage every single person. So you got to trap them in this kind of endless chaos of existence. So I don't know if anybody recalls this, but Last Man is from Nietzsche. It's considered the last human on Earth, or at least not the last human on Earth, the last sort of self-aware it's the last human who, my memory is fading me. There's a reason I picked this meme. I'm pretty sure someone in chat knows this. I'm just slipping right now. This is the guy from Idiocracy who's sitting in his chair when he walks up, and he's the guy who says baiting at the beginning. It's that guy, right? That's Nietzsche's Last Man in American parlance. It's this person who's just completely plugged into every possible bit of leisure and every possible concept of just decadence, and simply exists to consume. That's it. That's that person. Then you have Volk. Of course, Adolphin Hortler is the great evil. That's probably self-explanatory. You don't want people organizing here, especially at this level when it's too expensive, when you don't have the means to break them apart. So you just demonize any action that might result in a self-organization, especially automatic self-organization. Then there's, of course, every Redditor on Earth obsessed with contradiction. You make this a grand taboo. Oh, you're not logical, so therefore, here's how I'm going to destroy you. This is almost every single internet debate ever in the history of the internet. What you're doing is you're driving contradiction at this level. So people, again, don't self-organize. They don't feel like they understand anything beyond this point, so they have no interest in engaging in anything beyond this point. So you're snuffing their ability to engage in ambition at all, or even wiping out the desire to even look at this part of the equation. So it drives them further down into the more expensive bucket. And two boxing reprobates, the people who are kind of defying this identity regime, because what they're doing is they're being multiple people at the same time, whether it's identity fraud, whether they're being different people online, doesn't necessarily matter. It's the idea that I'm one person, but I have multiple personas. And that becomes really expensive to fix and becomes really expensive to track. So this is like usually deemed evil. And I'll give you an example of a word that all of you know and have used before to describe this behavior. And then you get to the very end where you have the inability to deploy a Turing test, because now we have people doing their identity hacking. They're making multiple identities, or they're making clouded identities. And then we're trying to automatically detect them because we don't have the resources to actually enforce, a universal bonding or homogenization. We only have like, I don't know, $700 down here. So what you're doing is you're leaving something wide open for you don't have the resources to deploy Turing tests to then separate which box is the real box. And then to drive home the point, this is a captcha check saying I am not a robot being tapped by a robot with googly eyes. So that's kind of what happens. So this is what I've described to you is how the Blue Church maintains its, we use the word control, but I think that's too broad and I think it misses so much. This is the system of incentives the Blue Church uses to reach the maximum amount of identities required to keep its system going. And then there's a threshold in which these people are just written off. You don't need them anymore. They're too expensive. You don't have the resources anyway. Just demonize them. Call it a day. So that's Blue Church, right? Then the internet happened. That changed things because now you can play the game of masks. So here's a schlep and deli owner. But online, that's a supermodel. And that's Fran Ank. It doesn't matter. I'm online. I could be a dog. I could be a chipmunk. Who cares? Doesn't matter. I'm online. You can't prove that I'm not that person that I'm presenting as. You just have no way of doing it. It's like, oh my God, palindrome friends, right? And then they're chatting. Let me step back here. Boop, boop. So the chatting, you go to a chat. Like the reason why it's this way to begin with is because it was too expensive to send any type of proof of identity in the early internet. It wasn't possible. You had like 2400 baud rate, and you were sending text at best. You couldn't send pictures or video or audio or GPS stuff or all the metadata crap that's going on now. You just had text, period. And if all you have with each other is text, man, you could lie all day long. There is no proof of identity you can even enforce here, and it's way too expensive. So that's how this game started. And when you deal with like some of the really old people on 4chan, they remember these days. These are the glory days. These are the golden age of the internet, man. You could be anything and anyone. And it was good because the rest of the world was obsessed with identity at this time. They couldn't get enough of it. I'm a FARC guerrilla. I'm a European pan-nationalist theist, blah, blah, blah. I'm a liberal conservative social democrat. Look at me dance, right? The whole world was obsessed with identity because it was so deeply tied to Cold War dynamics. The internet was a way to say, fuck that. I don't care about that anymore. That's stupid. I exist independent of these paradigms. So yeah, I am a 2-box supermodel because fuck it. And that was the early internet, and the primary means of communication made that so. So now we have to incentivize honest identities here, and we don't have to. This shit posting everyone's lying game could have gone on forever, and maybe it would have been better if it did. At least it would have been a nice pressure valve for all the social stuff we're seeing now. But unfortunately, advertisers had to get involved, and they saw a bunch of people in chat rooms and mailing lists and everything else, and they said, I want to make money. I want to sell to these people. Of course, then Google and Facebook come in and said, aha, I know what to do. I will connect people to who they want to be connected to and what it is they want to be connected to. So these people will now be empowered to fulfill their preference selection. And we're going to bind that with advertising. So we're going to incentivize people to stop doing this. And that resulted in the collection of face data and GPS data and voice prints and gate data and social network data. And before you know it, you didn't necessarily destroy these personas. People can still do them. But for the people who care, they could figure out who's who. So now what we've done with this system is we've taken all of the crazy identity mess that these people initially escaped when they went to the internet, and we have forced it back on the internet. So we've tried to synchronize our identity control regimes, our identity heuristics upon this space where there wasn't any. And oh, by the way, this space is not organic. This space is a digital representation of all of these things. So there's automatically a mistranslation. And let's look at what that mistranslation looks like. So when you get started way back in, I don't know, 1980, imagine that each pixel is like, I mean, obviously it's a pixelated image, but try and pretend that as you're collecting, as your GPS technology is growing, as your sound print technology is growing, as your image technology is growing, it starts out really weak. It doesn't have high resolution. Maybe the GPS is only sending 1 ping a minute. Maybe the voice print's only capturing 1 every second. So it's a really low resolution, and you're trying to make sense between them all. But as Moore's law goes on, your Gaussian identity, which is the collection of all of these things that make you up in the digital space, the distribution of these data points, it increases in resolution over time. So now we can understand better how to market to you, and better to understand your psychological dispositions and what social network you're going to go to next. And it gets even better over time, and it gets really good over time. So now we're increasing the fidelity of our identity selection mechanisms as Moore's law goes up. It's pretty obvious, at least. So what happens when we get good enough? What happens when we get to the spot where, yeah, maybe doesn't, we don't have all the data on this person. We have enough to get what he's going. Well, that's where we get our Gaussian distribution. Not all data is infinitely valuable, and I feel real bad for investors come 2025, where they say data is the new oil. That's not true. There's a Gaussian distribution, meaning the resolution of digital identity versus the profit extracted from successful identity targeting. There's a relationship here. So if you follow this, you'll see that crap resolution and then extremely good resolution. But that's not what's it. Getting more resolution does not drive more profit. There is a normal distribution in which you have good enough, and adding more resolution to the data won't do a goddamn thing. So we have these two spaces. Is the data I have on this person, is that a blob or is that a person? I don't know what that is. I don't have enough resolution to answer that question. That's going to drive me to answer that question. And then I'm going to start collecting more data, like, oh, how long is my fingernail on a Tuesday? Like, how are you going to turn that into marketing data, right? Well, so you don't need to increase more information. You don't need to gather more stuff. So there's a sweet spot right here. And once you identify that sweet spot, tinkering with these pressures will allow you to disassemble the entire blue church. It will crush them. And I'll show you why. So here's our political, I'm sorry, this thing's in the way. Here's our political priority gradient, where we've already walked through all of the pressures that are designed to drive populations in one direction or another based on cost distribution of the identity heuristics. So we're going to draw your focus over here, and I don't even have my laser on. Oh man, I am trademark laser. Sorry guys, I'm just losing it today. How do we work with the inability to deploy Turing tests to, instead of driving people back, they drive them forward? Well, we mimic the blue church with bots, and we use natural language processing content generators, because they can't deploy Turing tests to stop them. So now the people who are here, I can push them up a line. I can get them to care about what's going on. Ah, how interesting. How do I beat these two-box reprobates? How do you say that when, if you get an online argument, you'll say, wait, I'm arguing with this person, but then this person comes in and wait, they're always in agreeing. What if you found out it was the same person from two accounts? That would feel like someone's cheated the game, right? And you're like, you cheated with your identity. I'm arguing against the same person. You leave the argument upset and, pissed and whatever. But the other way to do that is just call them trolls. They're trolling you. So now, instead of, saying that identity multiplication is a sin, we've made it a fun thing to do. It's a fad. It's cool to do. It's hilarious. So now we push people, instead of people being pushed down by being two boxing reprobates, we incentivize being two boxing reprobates and we push them up. Contradiction, you say, oh, well, you didn't logically dash your T and dot your I here, so that's a contradiction. I got you. And you do the autism hair splitting all day that Reddit's known for. Well, in this case, we don't need to do contradiction. Contradiction drives people that way, drives people this way. I want to drive people this way. So instead of saying contradiction, where you have to sit there and redo your white paper, which is really just like a 20-word comment, is engage in conspiracy instead. So instead of trying to do that high fidelity logical discussion that you're being forced to do under a contradiction paradigm, you say, well, I'm just going to speak in a very fuzzy manner. I'm going to say, well, the apple was here or it wasn't, but you get my drift. You say stuff like that. You speak in much relaxed tones. And so what you're doing is you're bypassing the contradiction. So any guard keeping that's done here, instead of driving you backwards, again, it's driving you forwards. When it comes to Volk is the grand taboo. No one's ever allowed to assemble unless it's pre-authorized by academia or financial banking until you get the gamers. Oh boy, gamers are, those people. They organize for fun. They don't do it for politics or for, identity reasons. They just get together and shoot each other for fun. They get drunk, smoke weed, call each other the N-word all day. Yeah, it's just a bunch of dudes, whatever. They're having fun. And what you're doing is you're making Volk the grand taboo, which will drive people this way. And now we're saying gaming, we're going to drive them that way. Taking the Last Man. Last Man is a tough one to beat because it's so philosophically well understood. It's a real tough one to beat. So the way you beat it is actually with nostalgia. So if you ever see a Last Man, one of those dudes from Idiocracy who's just baiting on his couch all day, what you do is you kind of either remind him of the fact that he came from a line of people, or you look at yourself and realize you came from a line of people who made this possible. Nostalgia is a tough one. It goes both ways. And it could be, wow, our ancestors are so great. And you're like, we can be great. And the implication was we could be great too. And then it can go the other way and say, oh, wow, our ancestors are so great. Which you're like, oh man, we've fallen so far. So you got to be real careful with nostalgia. This is a hit or miss, but again, Last Man is a real tough one to beat. The amount of drugs that exist in the system to keep people in this state is pretty immense. So this is a tough one to overcome, but there are ways to push it up. Contributing through defeat, which is the sour grape scenario, where you tried to start a business and it fails, and you just throw it up and say, well, I didn't want to start that business anyway. Right? You rationalize your own loss. You just shame those people. You call them cucks. Screw them. Because you lost, and you're rationalizing that loss, and you're living with that rationalization. You're a cuck. So instead of people losing and feeling okay about that loss and being driven this way, no, we're driving you that way. And the reason we want to drive them that way is so they can run through this funnel we've already built. They're going to be driven in this way, and they're going to run through this funnel, and then when they come back, they will not be under the influence of the blue church at all. Because this is the ungoverned space. This is where they cannot deploy resources. The peacock tails, where I'm the celebrity, I'm the big sexy thing. Look at my natural disposition and look how charming and charismatic I am. The Hollywood thing, that's the peacocking tails, appealing to all that individualist drive and compulsion. Well, what if you found a way to create communities where the content is more important than the person sharing the content, or the content's more important than the person who made the content? That's what anonymous image boards do. The content is superior to the person who posts. So we take these hyper individual poor souls and we say, you literally don't matter because you're no different than a bot on an image board. It's your content. It's your contribution that matters. It's not what you look like that matters. So we take those people and we say, to the back you go. You're getting pushed right, buddy. Fighters and NPCs, these hair-triggered guard labor of the regime, you just pre-detonate them. How do you do that? With taboo muletas? You know, a muleta is that red cape that the bullfighter has. So what you do is you find a taboo that person is predispositioned to hate, and you just dump it on them nonstop every day till they detonate over and over and over again, till they isolate themselves, till they remove themselves from their support network, to the point they become a burden, to the point that they're too expensive. Imagine if a bodyguard was running around punching every single person in the bar because someone just triggered them, right? That bouncer would get fired, and now that guard labor has been removed. So instead of that guard labor going to the left, now we're pushing it to the right. So we're going to detonate you until you're gone, because you're so far gone, there's no way of even reaching you with logic. It's just we don't have the cost to even support that that reformation of your character. Sorry, all we can do is push you to the right and hope that you go through this pipeline that we've set up on the way here. Conscientiousness, the idea that I have to be reasonable and I have to be rational. That's good. You actually want to keep that. You don't necessarily want to destroy that as is. Instead, what you want to do is you want to use memes to atomize morality. Meaning, instead of moral systems being this fuzzy thing where you say, it's one half or the other, everything, there's a gray area, this type of conscientiousness, that these tactics you use to try and bring parties together. What you do instead is you use memes to atomize every part of that blob. Every part of that gray area, you put a wedge with a meme. So now, instead of the person trying to not rationalize, but instead of that person leaving open a wide space in which people can then kind of come together, now they have to negotiate all of those little axioms, all of those little points that those memes were leading to, and they have to make sense of that. So their conscientiousness gets atomized. They start being very specific about what it is. Excuse me. They start becoming very specific about who they let into their systems instead of having this wide tent. So you still keep conscientiousness, but instead of having it at a universal scale where you're maximizing the number of people who are going through your conscientious process, instead what you're doing is you're saying, okay, here's the local area that this person's probably going to gravitate towards anyway, and that's what they're actually defending this whole time. They're not out there trying to maximize for maximum amount of people and kumbaya shit. They're saying, okay, here's what they actually care about. And they'll have a small group of people where they can be conscientious, and that's good. You want that. We're not trying to wipe that off the earth. But in this case, they'll be because they're precise about their conscientiousness, the system will attack them. The regime will attack them, and that's going to drive them right. So in this case, we're activating is here where we get to the conscientious part, where we activate the immune system of the regime, and we drive them to the right because we actually want to preserve conscientiousness. We just want to redefine it to something that's actually reasonable. You could say that I'm conscientious about, starving kids in Africa. That is sad. That is objectively sad shit, of course. But your neighbors are starving too. What's relevant? What's actually meaningful? Make the meme atomized, and you force them to make that localization. Antinatalism is a tough one. The reason you fight it is because it's a pre-programmed trigger, not because you actually support stuff. That's not the point. The point is, this is such a heavily implanted meme in so many people that if you do not take advantage of this, you are not playing to win. So what you do is the typical statement is that, they're not alive or they're not human or all these things. That doesn't matter. The point is, I can make you see them human by pointing out their identity asymmetries. Y'all ever heard of gendercide? If they're not alive, does that mean I'm not disproportionately killing women when I abort them? Uh-oh, now we have a problem. If I decide to disproportionately apply abortion onto a Black community, is that racist or what is it? So what I'm doing now is I'm using the morality of the regime to cause fraction points in this, for whatever reason, this meme that they have swore this hill they would die on over and over again. So this is kind of a blend of the pre-detonation strategy. But again, you attack here not because you have an opinion on the subject. You attack here because they have just sunk so many goddamn hours into making people think that this is the hill to die on that you have to activate it. And the goal to activate it is to drive them to the right, because they either dig in and they keep going this way and they get rewarded for digging in, and they will, or they start to see that, hey, now wait a second, maybe disproportionately aborting females might be a bad thing, in which this whole system will then whack them and into our tunnel they go. Universalism, the beautiful idea that we're all the same and we should all be treated equally. These are beautiful words. Most beautiful words ever written, no doubt. But there's a reason tribalism exists in our psychology, and it's psycho armor. And the idea that I go to a identity tribe, or not an identity tribe, but I go to this tribal state with people who are similar to myself, and that's not just to reassert confirmation bias. That's the blue church concept. We're going to these tribes so that we can defend ourselves from the onslaught of epistemic wildness that's coming our way. We can't make sense of it alone, and if we are alone, you're drifting in this ocean of chaos that's going to toss back and forth between this gradient. And nobody wants that because no one person can make sense of any of this stuff, right? It's just way too much data points. So you go to tribes to give you a psychological armor, a filter, a way of processing all of this noise that's going on. So what you do is you provide tribes that correspond to the universalism. So, for example, universalism, this wonderful idea that we can all push each other in one direction or another, or we're all the same. I mean, tribes of cycle. What if I make a tribe of universalism? What if I make a tribe of the people who like universalism? So what if I just fragment this down over and over again? And it looks like universalism all the same, but in reality, I'm normalizing their entry in the tribes and I'm normalizing their ability to go into these places. So now once they do it, they have psycho armor, and all of a sudden the universalism doesn't work anymore because they're locally bound to the people in that tribe over time. So instead of leaving the door open for as many human beings as possible, like we were just some statistical graph, they start making and forming actual bonds with people. And upon doing so, they will be seen as enemies of the regime, and to the right they go. Self-victimization, again, the idea that I am a martyr. I'm a martyr with multiple steps between myself and glorious sacrifice and detonation. You use anonymization to diffuse martyrdom. Martyrdom is deeply tied to identity. It is like one of the hallmarks of identity, the idea that a person is willing to die for the preservation of an identity heuristic. And if you combine that with mass media, then people who die in the defense of that identity heuristic are martyrized, they're lionized, they're a great hero, and we have, there's an army of heroes every single day, right? But if people are anonymous and they don't exist, and they're hidden behind VPN and Tor, and you have entire communities where this is the case, where's the martyrs? How can you have a martyr if there's no identity? There's no such thing as a 4chan martyr. You might say, oh, the Christ Church guy. That he was not operating on behalf of the anonymous community. He had his own identity martyrdom complex as well. But you don't see 4chan running out there self-detonating. It's way too funny to make people detonate. Way too funny. So again, instead of self-victimization being a guard labor mechanism, what you do is, by being anonymous, these people who are ready to detonate at a moment's notice, when they do, it doesn't matter. They detonate in the wrong places. There's no more additional martyrs in the pipeline because they've all gone anonymous. So you're chipping away. Now we're getting to the heart of things. We're chipping away at the key distributions of the political regime. Homogenization is it's where everyone is completely on board. And not just in a static way, in a way that where they say, yes, I agree with the regime and everything they do. Very few people say that. What they do is they rationalize when the regime makes a wild swing. So like when the regime says, we're going to save, cats, everyone's like, yes, I'm a cat person. And then the regime says, fuck cats. And you're like, well, the cats deserved it, right? That's a rationalization. That's also homogenization, where you're backstopping the regime in every possible permutation they make, because of course you do. Look at all the resources you're getting. No shit, you back the regime. You're not doing it because you're malicious or you're a bootlicker. You're on the payroll, buddy. No kidding. So how do you break homogenization? With meme infections. If everyone's thinking the same anyway, drop a good meme in there and away it goes. You have a homogenized population, a virus will fuck that population up. So you just drop memes that are just viral and spread all over the place as much as you can. And anybody who falls for the meme, to the right you go. Exhibitionist Stockholm syndrome, the self-branding cattle. These are tough. This is a tough one because these are people who are used to scarification and people who are used to having the shit kicked out of them. They like abuse. They like the idea of being controlled. It's sort of sadomasochistic in a sexual term, but it's more like deferring to the alpha, deferring to the silverback, effectively. You can't kick these people. There's a reason they're the last stop. Because the more you abuse them, the more the system is able to use that abuse as rationalization to restore itself. So you can't deploy levels of violence on them. But we do have the internet. We have our Turing tests. We have our 2boxing. We have our trolls. We have our whole pipeline that can support us in fulfilling their social fantasies. Remember, these people are way off the what do you call it? The self-esteem wagon. They left that thing like 20,000 years ago. They're way the hell off it. So we can use this pipeline to artificially fulfill the thing that they've never had. So instead of coming at these guys with warlike intent, you actually come to them with flowers and roses. And you say, we're going to make you part of this group. We're going to make you part of this thing. And we're going to treat you like a human being, like legitimately. Instead of you being surrounded by your fellow rejects all the time, we're going to reach out to you and grab you and say, hey, man, you're human just like us. And that is not what this system is prepared for. They do not like that, because this is the last step. This is the basis of their entire regime moral structure, is the idea that they've surrounded themselves with these historically displaced people and they use them as a human shield. The only way to beat them is to actually display decent humanism towards them over and over again, even if it costs you your life, even if it costs you everything you have to include them and you have to take care of them, because this is not what that system is prepared to handle. It's the last thing they'd expect. And then runaway domestication, you can't even touch runaway domestication until you've addressed all of these other points. There's no way. So once you've been able to do all this, now you can change how celebrities are perceived. That's one of the major reinforcers of runaway self-domestication. While I'm doing this thing, I'm self-domesticating myself, and I always check and I see, oh, there's a popular person. Oh, okay, whatever the popular person's doing, okay, I'll incorporate it. Now, of course, regime controls celebrity, but if we can make everybody a celebrity, if instead of celebrities being this small collection of pre-sorted individuals, if every single human being was a celebrity, well, that changes things. That changes everything. Now, how do you do that? Well, we're already living through it now. The idea of like Twitch people or people doing live streaming or micro celebrities or stuff like that. You use that technique and you make it accessible. You take this drive to be a celebrity and you make it everywhere. You make it as open as you can for everybody. And so these people who run away self-domesticate, they'll still engage in the self-domestication mechanism. You're never going to defeat that. It's just core to their being. But they're going to pick the wrong celebrity. So instead of like a list of 100, now they have like a million. And which one do they pick? Well, it doesn't matter which one they pick. They're picking, there's so many options that they can't pick the same one. So that one celebrity that held all that power, gone, diffused, utterly gone. So that was intense. So let's see where this may go when we apply this regime hacking that I'm proposing. We're going to look at our psychometric liberal capitalism, all the identity heuristics that are accessible to the resources that are available in the order of thus. And remember, around here, the pipeline shifts, where driving people this way is the goal of the regime. And once you get to this point, you drive them this way until they become full Alex Jones. So we just walk through a system of pushing people here this way, and then pushing people here this way so that when they get here, they can push back this way. So what does that mean? Just because you push the people doesn't mean they're walking through these identity heuristics as they get pushed through the pipeline. That's not what happens. As they get pushed through the pipeline, they carry their identity heuristic with them all the way to the top. So what I showed you is a way to invert the identity heuristics of a regime. There is a way to turn psychometric liberal capitalism into automated cultarch city-states using the technique I just showed you, where you put alchemy at the beginning, meaning a black box AI that you have no idea how it's making its process. And it's using the fuzziness of quantum mechanics to make its decisions. And these two things get all the resources. And then that plays out on the city-state of geopolitics, which is going to have a heavy focus on CRISPR and quantizing stuff, which is going to be about improving the individual and groups form wherever they can, not because they have to. All of that becomes a financial driver, and the poisons of math and psychology are kicked to the dustbin of history for at least a couple hundred years until people get their shit together. So that's it. That's how you defeat the blue church. Using that analysis, criticize it, mutate it, dismiss it, whatever. It's Friday. Have fun.
Cool. All right. So if you have questions, drop it in the chat box now. If it was listed above, if you can repaste it or copy and paste it again, that'd be great. So I guess I'll start with this one, a simple one. As individuals in this chat room right now, the Zoom chat, what could we do?
Jeez. Well, I would take a I would take a honest self-assessment as to what identity heuristics you subscribe to, and why you subscribe to them, and which ones you don't like and why you don't like them. And that will give you an understanding of when these games are at play, so you can pick to say, I don't want to be part of this game because I see the game, or maybe this is my time to get involved in the game. So that's a good investment of your time.
And to double click on the last man one, which you said was sort of tricky, I was actually thinking of writing an article called the last man syndrome to kind of like unpack the characteristics of that. And a guy like Peterson, you know, he kind of addresses the last man directly with like clean your room and shit like that. So what do you think of like his approach to addressing that, and how effective was that?
His approach is a kick to the face. It doesn't feel like it, but it is. But it's a necessary kick, because what he's doing is he's trying to regain the idea that accountability exists. And you can't do that in universalism. When you have universalism, there's no difference between you and me. So who the hell's accountable? If you're just as unaccountable as I am and we're in a universal paradigm, then there's no accountability. So if you're the last man and you're starting to recognize that perhaps some of the problems you're facing may be coming from a lack of accountability, but you might not have the words for it. The idea of cleaning your room is a way of practicing at a very tiny scale what it means to be accountable for your own actions. And that is what a fatherly archetype would do and would say and should guide people on doing. And I think that's part of Peterson's success, is he fills the void for that fatherly archetype.
Mm. And I'm curious, what do you think the use or extent of sort of offline approaches? I recall reading something from this like satanic group called the Order of Nine Angles, and they had like something called insight roles, where you adopt like extremist positions, like you actually go and live amongst extremist Islam or like neo-Nazis, just to break down your identity against the establishment. Yep. Maybe there's like a more loving approach to that, you adapt these different identities, and in this post-rational kind of space that a lot of people find themselves in, they love improv and acting, emotional affective patterns and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Do you think that could be purpose to help with this?
It can. I spent 14 years in Hollywood. I'm slightly media trained, but not to the extent that some of these professional actors are. Those guys are good. But the idea of, we made reference to this in the last video, the idea of breaking your identity on purpose. There's a multitude of ways to do it. I propose something that's like guaranteed to do it, but it's pretty brutal. And that's just picking a fight and losing it, Tyler Durden style. But there are definitely softer ways to do it, and more gradual ways, such as going to improv or spend time on 4chan. You know, try and keep up with that mess. I dare you to apply some kind of systemic definition of rationality to 4chan. You're not going to succeed. It's just, you can say, oh, it's all alt-right and Nazi all day. Yeah. And then I see a post about someone loving their cat. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, it's just random. So if challenging identity in yourself is hard, so you may want to start with challenging your ability to identify others. I think that's more acceptable for people, because the losses are much lower. So if you fail to identify a person on the internet and you're just lurking and watching them, that's okay. Go ahead and make those judgments about people. And then instead of letting that judgment define what you see from the rest of the content you're exposed to, hold that judgment and then try to hold it as more stimuli appears. And you'll find that, oh, maybe my identity mechanism is a little broken. And once you come to that conclusion about other people, there's a good chance you'll make it about yourself too.
Cool. All right, so we'll pivot to the questions. Quips, you had a question about alchemy. If you can unmute yourself and ask it.
Sure. Hey, Patrick. How are you? My question was, considering alchemy is so well respected by weird, spoopy elite types, I'll put up there, and not only that, but its contribution to science and all of the other heuristics that you mentioned, DNA, Jack Parsons with rocket, just the weaving of ancient, supernatural sort of things with science. Given that, is its position at the bottom of this hierarchy indicative of distaste or an attempt to dissuade all but them to pay any attention to that area?
It can be both. It can be both simultaneously. The idea of alchemy does rely on the concept of secret knowledge, and if you have secret knowledge that's publicly known and publicly understood by all these people, then it ain't so secret now, is it? So it's a monopoly. There's a lot of monopolistic practices surrounding alchemy, and that's whether that's by engineering design. It's let's step back a bit. We live in a world where mathematics is mostly universalized. For most of history, this was not the case. Only after, I think it was Hinton. No, it wasn't Hinton. That's the AI guy. Hilbert, whatever. Hilbert, I think it was Hilbert. He was one of the guys who was able to arithmetize mathematics. And he did this like in the early 1900s. Before that, mathematics was like artisanal guilds and artisanal mathematicians. You had to go to like this part of you physically had to go to this part of the planet to understand a certain type of mathematics. You had to physically go to another type of the planet to understand mathematics. There was no unified system of understanding this shit. And when you're doing that, you're closely guarding your secrets because they're really valuable. Especially in the Prussian Empire, mathematics was essential to their monopoly on optics in the 1800s. Optics were everything when you had artillery. You could precisely target things that you wanted to. You could spy, you could send semaphore. You have all these militaristic advantages from optical glass alone, and the means to make that glass was heavily rooted in mathematics, which required those mathematics to be secret. So yes, you do get secrecy. Secrecy does happen when there are heavy dependence upon that secret being revealed. The same is true for encryption today, the NSA. What if the NSA released a backdoor to AES 256? Holy shit, the internet would be over, right? So you still, even now, you have mathematics being held in secret for the same reason. And I suspect when it comes to alchemy, the same type of chain of dependency also forms naturally, because alchemy is a heuristic on how to organize people to do something you can't do. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. So if you can't figure out how to build a spaceship, how do you organize people to build a spaceship for you, even though you don't know how to do it? And that's what alchemy gives you some understanding of how to do. And once you got a secret on that, you're probably going to keep it. So.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to read this question on someone's behalf. How much mobility Pat thinks there is in this spectrum as individuals? How much mobility is being experienced? Are these states exclusive of each other?
Mobility, as in the ability to move through. You won't experience mobility in any type of regime. What you will experience is the constant struggle to not be pushed to the right. That's what you'll experience. So that'll manifest as social pressure. That'll manifest as keeping up with the Joneses. Might manifest as I'm not making enough money. I'm not living up to my parents' ambition. I'm not worshiping my ancestors appropriately. I'm not worshiping God appropriately. I'm not bowing to the right minority at the right time. You're not mobily moving. You don't have the freedom to move through a regime. That's not the purpose of the regime. The regime is to identify where you can be put in the cost of control paradigm while you're still extracting useful goods. And so you're self-selecting for what type of control it is you want to be under. And the regime's job is to just create as many channels as possible that are cost efficient for their maintenance. So it's not mobility in the sense it's like saying that I'm in a prison. Do I have mobility to jump between cells? I mean, yeah, but you're still in a prison. I mean, what's that going to do for you? You get closer to the mess hall. I guess you can have better trade with the corrupt guard there, but that's about it. That's all you got to look forward to. Your chances of being thrown in isolation are much higher if you step out of line, and that's true in a regime as well. So you're not experiencing mobility as much as you're fighting entropy. You're fighting social order entropy to hold your position in whatever cost beneficial slot of prison that you just happen to be okay enough with. So.
All right, so here's another question I'm going to read. Once someone emerges from Last Man through nostalgia, how do you insert a new identity heuristic? Is this what religion captures in the Blue Church? Takes the alchemy box and refocuses it towards self-domestication?
You might have noticed in this whole thing, I never explained how to get someone from one identity heuristic to another. And the reason I didn't do that is because it is way too fucking expensive. It is so cost intense to get a person to shift from one heuristic to another. How do you take a scientist and say, guess what? It's geopolitical time, when that scientist has spent their entire lives embracing all of the techniques and have been rewarded for those techniques to bind their identity to solving complicated problems in a event-driven way, a mathematical way, these types of ways. And then you turn around and say, oh, by the way, are you Swedish? Because we only reward Swedes around here. That's not going to fly. That is just that is a mind fuck of an ask. You're not going to get there. So I don't even focus on the idea of getting people to go from one identity heuristic to another. You're just not going to do it. It's easier to move the heuristics around.
Patches, you had a question. If you're going to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I got two short questions. Is there a science of viral memes? Is it like a black box AI or humans or both? And then the second one is, would you call the black box alchemic AI equivalent to like idealized free will?
Idealized free will. Give me a primer.
Something that is actually free that always makes the right choice.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Yes, there is a science to mimetic mutation. It does exist. It's not like the one science. It's not like one algorithm or equation. It is a series of methodologies at different times and different time evolutions. It does exist. It's real. It works. It's amazing. The second thing is regarding an AI having the total freedom of decision. The problem with an AI having an idealized free will is that any decision the AI makes, it's on the hook for. It is accountable for that decision. So if it makes a decision that favors one group or another, it now depends upon that group it favors on. So what it's done is, as it moves through the capacity for free will, which is a very shortly lived part of its life cycle, it now creates dependencies on all the things it needs to keep its own existence alive. So its free will is gradually converted into a pipeline system of delivering resources to sustain itself. And so its ability to move freely between identity heuristics, it's not as free as one would suspect, because maybe there's parasites in the system who are taking kickbacks. Maybe there's inefficiencies in the form of local corruption. These things creep in like a cancer. And so you don't have, not even an AI would have all of the free will, because it is responsible for its own actions.
Thank you.
Kevin, you had a question. If you're going to unmute yourself.
Hi. Sure, thanks. So Patrick, in the beginning, you compared your two examples of, I guess, what you call blue church religions. And you had different identity heuristic orderings. And you said they were merely mutations of the same DNA strand. And your suggestion, or the final slide that you're presenting, it seems to me like they were just the same identity heuristics, but in a different order, with maybe the exception that alchemy is the highest. Is there something that I'm missing that like makes your suggested ordering like different than just another mutation of the same genetic strand? Or is it, sure, if you could elaborate on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think I blew through it. My apologies. I think there's a part of me that there was something else I was supposed to say on that end slide, and I don't think I said it, so thank you for bringing that up. The reason why it's the blue church isn't necessarily certain types of configurations. It's the fact that it puts alchemy at the end. That's what makes it blue church, more than anything. So that's why it has the same DNA strand. No matter what the configuration is, as long as alchemy is near the end, it's blue church. So what I'm proposing isn't a system that I want. I don't know what life is like in an automated cult arc of city-states. I couldn't even, I gave some recommendations of what it would look and feel like in auto cults. I don't know if I want to live in such a world. The reason why this blue church, this type of Hegelian critique of the blue church that I just walked through on how to completely upend it, what I'm saying is, if I figure this out, there are people with resources who not only have figured this out, but they are deploying them, and they are going to fuck up that particular identity heuristic combination. And what will most likely happen in this space is that all of these other means of establishing identity heuristics will become either too expensive or pointless. And the reason why I'm saying that the auto cults will come into play is because they will be the only enduring identity provider compared to everything else. So they will be able to manifest identities on the fly that actually get people involved and get people engaged, and they see themselves as that tiny little aspect of that cult. And so that's the only way to actually manifest identity in a world where the ability to attack the blue church becomes exponentially cheaper. So it's not something I want. It's just that's probably the tide of the way things are going.
Thanks.
Aaron, you had a question.
Hey, Pat. What is your identity heuristic? I don't know if you're saying you can have multiple identity heuristics, but what is yours and how did you arrive at it?
Yeah, just as a political system has a priority of identity heuristics, humans do too. Individual humans do as well. I tend to put alchemy pretty high up, only because I'm trying to do something that I can't do. So it's a functional relationship. It's not that I'm out there, sacrificing goats and shit. I'm using alchemy as a way to try my hand at getting us the hell off of this planet once and for all, which I've stated multiple times in other videos, so I hope this isn't too much of a shock for newcomers. But the idea is to configure the human condition in a way to where once they go into space, they're never leaving. We tried that. We threw a couple things into space. Go NASA, woohoo, Team America. But what happened? Well, the Saudi Arabians got involved. They're like, well, there's oil, by the way. And that was it. That's all they had to do. They said oil exists, and the game was over. Nobody went into space anymore. Didn't matter. Because you didn't have to expand because everybody got trapped in this dumbass oil game, this petrocurrency game that we're stuck in to this day with the forever war and all the mess that's behind all that stuff. So lessons learned. It's not enough to trust the eggheads and the scientists. You're going to have to get everybody involved. And the way to get everybody involved is through alchemy. You won't be able to do it through sociology. Sociology is just a tool. Psychology is just a tool. Every single one of these are a tool. Alchemy tends to be a bit scale invariant. You can apply it to a person. You can apply it to a population. It's the same science all the way through. So I tend to functionally utilize that. Do I bind my identity to it? I don't know, man. I don't know. I just shitpost for a living. I think that's my identity. I don't know.
Cool. Billy, you had a question. Billy, are you with us? All right.
I guess why would you want to? What purpose is there for dismantling the Blue Church? Like, who would want to do that?
Sure. The Blue Church has made many enemies over the centuries, so there's a lot of geopolitical interests who would definitely want to smash that thing. And then there are people who are under the Blue Church who are being targeted by it, and they don't know what to do about it. They're being either automatically censored, or they're being demonized in the social space. Maybe they're being falsely imprisoned. Maybe they have, it's very easy to abuse someone with a very complex regime and then deflect the blame onto another person. That's what most sophisticated modern regimes do. And eventually when a person goes through that enough, they start to see, hey, now, wait a second. Like if you've ever been to jail, and I don't know if a lot of people have been to jail, but I've been to jail and my brother's been to jail. And I've worked for people who have spent long times in jail. And they will very quickly see that the system is rigged in a prison the same way that people might see that the system is rigged outside of prison. In the case of prisons, you will find that the guards will intentionally instigate fights between prisoners. Now, why would they do that? Seems a little cruel, doesn't it? Nope, it's policy. Because if the prisoners are fighting each other, the statistics show that you don't have to pay health care for wounded guards because the guards aren't getting wounded. The prisoners are beating each other to death. Now, if the prisoners are already beating each other up at the appropriate ratios, good, you don't have to do anything. But if they aren't, then the prisoners are probably working together and they're going to start beating up the guards. So you take away a TV here, you take away commissary rights there, you take away access to the library here, and before you know it, people are riled up, ready to whack each other. And that's what it is. Eventually you see that system and you're like, damn, this whole shit's rigged. But you're in a prison, a physical space, there's physically nothing you could do about it. But we're in an open prison. There is still stuff we can do about this kind of thing. So instead of these people running around blaming one identity heuristic or another, if you see the game and you see the guards intentionally starting fights, and you see that they're doing it to protect themselves, well, people will gravitate towards a medley of ways to fight against that. And 99% of ways to fight against that fail. I'd like to think that this is on the right path. So we'll see what happens.
I'm reminded of that Robert Downey Jr. Quote, says, if you go to jail, you can't come out as a liberal.
It's really hard.
All right, Key, you're up.
Hi.
Howdy.
Thank you very much for going through the heuristics. I just want to also say that when you said the cost of the control paradigm while you're still extracting useful goods, okay, cool. And then fighting entropy to hold your position in the prison, okay, wow. And then, so my question is, like, I understand the green arrows and the red arrows, that's great. But what I didn't really understand is the anti-natalism part of it.
Yeah.
And the reason, like, I ask that because, like, I really didn't understand the 20-year-olds thing and then the disproportionately aborting females thing.
Okay. Yeah. So I can go over that again. Mathematically, I'm going to do my best to not stand on soapboxes and start criticizing people. If I do, just like, I don't know, shoot me or something. But the giving the raw numbers, I'm gonna say some raw numbers here, and if I'm wrong on these numbers, let me know. I'm just throwing the numbers out. My generation, 1981 and up, 20% of my generation was aborted. 20%, 20%, right? Aborted, gone, right? So poof, toast, just toast, right? So imagine if I had 20% extra me's during 2008. What would have been the outcome? Do you think those banks would have gotten away with what they did, or you think we would have marched one floor at a time through Goldman Sachs, kneecapping everybody from the secretary all the way to the CEO? Give me an extra 20%, berserkers who have no jobs. Yeah, we'll march on Goldman Sachs, no problem. That's not an issue. They're already doomed, those 20%. So what did we do? We just took them out the picture before they were a problem. That's policy. They sold it as a right. They sold it as part of your identity. They sold it as this thing to feel about the good side of history on. It's a good sell. I mean, at the time, 1970, 1980, the culture was culturally social, kind of libertarian, live and let live, kind of laid back hippie stuff. That was the culture going into the 80s. So that's an easy sell. That's just basic marketing. You're targeting the right demographic. You're hitting the right messaging. So of course it's going to feel that way and it's going to be sold that way. But then you look at the numbers. You look at 300,000 blacks being aborted a year. You look at China aborting so many females that they have a male surplus, which is driving their militarism. They intentionally did that. They intentionally aborted the females so that they would have a surplus of males so that they'd have an army. They did that over 20 years. They had a one-child policy. You can only have one child, so who's it going to be? Is it going to be a boy or a girl? We're going to get rid of the girl because their social value is much less than compared to a firstborn son. And you can only get one. So they hacked abortion to build an army, and they did it. And now we're going to have to fight it. My generation's going to have to fight it. 20% less soldiers. So you just look at the numbers. You just look at the numbers. You don't cast moral judgment. You're not out there saying, how dare you have 20 abortions? I'm not what I'm doing. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply looking at the outcome of the policy. So Blue Church put heavy investment on that policy. And that because they put so much investment on that policy, that's valid battle space. That's a valid place you have to attack. I hope that makes sense.
It does, but what is the natal identity asymmetries part of it?
Oh, that's the idea of diffusing the argument that says a fetus isn't a human, which you can say, okay, but are they black? Are they female? It's not a human, but is it Indian? And then it's a point of contention. It's like, now wait a second. No, how can they be black but not a human? How can they be female if they're not alive? So what you're doing is you're conflating the identity stuff they've already been trained to do, and you're using it and saying, oh, by the way, we're going to challenge your definition of humanism here. So it's a muleta. It's a red flag for the bull.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Mimetic Caper, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could distinguish homogenization from universalism, because you had two different strategies. I think one of them was mimetic contagion, and the other one was some kind of atomization. And I think those are two distinct strategies, right? But it seems like they're kind of. I'm not clear on the distinction between homogenization and universalism.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Homogenization is achieving similar psychologies through rationalization, so that no matter how much the regime changes the way they perceive the world or have to make a policy shift, the people turn around and just make excuses for it, and now you have a homogenized population. It's not everybody thinking the same. It's everybody rationalizing at the same time. Whatever rationalizations they come up with is independent to that person, but it's the timing of that rationalization and the scale of it happening at the same time. And that's done primarily through news or elections or time scheduled things or stuff like that. Universalism is not necessarily homogenization. Universalism is the big umbrella, and it's a big umbrella of the regime. They say, kind of like the Romans. When the Romans decided to conquer a foreign colony, or well, it became a foreign colony. When they conquered a foreign people, they would butcher all the males, they would subjugate the females, and then they would take a Roman, not a politician, I forget which rank of the army, but a very high-ranking individual of the army would then come to the area and marry into the local population. And they would say that, look, we're just here for the resources and the slaves. We don't care about your culture. We don't care about your religion. Congratulations. Your religion is now part of our pantheon. You can keep your culture, but we just keep paying us. And if you don't pay us, we'll just keep stabbing you. And that was the Roman way of doing things. So that's universalism, surprisingly, because we're not trying to change your cultures. We're not trying to change the way you think and perceive reality. Keep those. In fact, that's what made you valuable. We want to keep that intact. So universalism is kind of like this acceptance of all cultures. And in the Bronze Age, it actually works pretty damn well, surprisingly. But when you start introducing telecommunications, that whole shit just whoop, over. That you can't really do sustained universalism anymore.
All right. Do you have time for one more question, Pat?
Sure.
Quips, I think you had another question in the chat box.
That I did, thank you. Sorry, I'm just gonna scroll up for it. Is there a way to devote your personal resources more equally to all the heuristics? Or do the limitations of our meat body / entropy always form that sort of hierarchical gradient that you've presented? I know that you were referring to the regime, but in our personal lives, is there a way to even that out and basically become like a bit of a jack of all trades as far as applying different identity heuristics to different situations in life? Is there, or do our brains always, through efficiency and all that sort of thing, always form that hierarchical gradient where certain heuristics are getting more resources than others, even in our personal lives?
Valid question. Yes, there is a way, but it's not forever. You have a window in which you can do it. You have to do it when the human is young, between the ages of 8 and 20 is your window. After that, they form personal lives, or they have families, or they get jobs and careers, and they got to do that forever. The way to do it is discipline. Discipline of saying, okay, discipline of the mind, discipline of the self. Having your identity destroyed as a child is always tough. It's pretty traumatic. It's a big source of trauma. But if you can do structured deconstruction of identity while the person is still a child, and you don't influence it to favor one identity heuristic over another, then what you can do is you get the kind of training that Aristotle gave to Alexander, where the idea is that here are the tools of human psychology. Use them wisely. Do not get married into one. Do not pick one as your identity. These are just tools. You use them as you need them. But that type of training is not available for everyone. It's hard to find that type of stuff.
So basically what you're saying is, as a 34-year-old man-child with no career, he lives with his mother, I still have time.
You still have time. You have time to learn it. Do you have time to practice it? Well, you have time to practice it, but are you free from retaliation? The answer is no.
Yes, the Blue Church will come for me, right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Okay. Lucky I got you here.
Yeah, I do what I can.
Cool. That about brings us to our time. Pat, do you have any closing thoughts?
The rest of this is a snippet. This is me going hard on season 1. I might be going just as hard. I'm sorry. This is me being hard on episode 1. I'm probably going to be this hard on the entire season. So if this type of military strategist energy is too much, let me know and I will work on toning it down, because this is like something I'm very excited about.
Well, it is the Dark Stoa, my friends. So I think you got some license. And how long is this series, you imagine?
I don't know yet. I'll see how much more of the meme I have to cover.
Cool. Well, I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Pat, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa / Dark Stoa today. So upcoming events, we have one tomorrow you should check out. It's called The Dangerous Space. It's about us engaging with dark and dangerous ideas in the most charitable way possible. And yeah, just check out our Wisdom Gym in general. We have an event with John Vervaeke and Akira the Dawn called Steal the Culture, which would be, John has this phrase called Steal the Culture, which he mentioned in the Stoa, and Akira the Dawn did like a music DJ version of it, which is pretty cool. We're going to listen to it and get into dialogos with each other. So that's on July 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And the Stoa is based off the gift economy. We view it as a gift for us to use in this time of need. If you're inspired to give a gift directly to Pat, Pat is on the gift economy website with a nice, cool illustration. So you can gift to him directly and just go to that website right there. All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
See you, folks. Thanks again.